Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depends wherever you are. Hopefully, we're all in. We've got our speakers here. We've got many people joining in. I'm still getting some bleeps in for people to join in. So, hopefully, we will have an exciting discussion in the next 1 hour or so. And it's all about inclusion. And just so everybody is, aware and you can ask as many questions as you like. There is a Q&A section. There is a chat button where you can chat. I'm going to do a quick introduction, not going to waste any time. We've got Nicole Benjamin, Tehya Bruce, Victoria Daniels, and Abid, and I am Nasir Khan. That is the introduction we are doing because we want to really get on with our key topic and discuss what is inclusion. And I want to start with a very interesting story about inclusion. And I've told it to quite a few people, but first time I'm telling it on a webinar openly. So I wasn't born in this country. I moved here as an adult. I was already educated, working, and I grew up in a very predominantly Muslim society. And things that came as normal to me back in, say, Pakistan were a bit different here. And it was my first week at work, and 12 o'clock, I put my jacket on, and my boss just looked at me, "Where you going?" And I said, "I need to go for Friday prayers." And he just looked at me like, "No, we've got a meeting at 1 o'clock." And this was my first discussion about creating awareness to make inclusion works for everyone. And then I had to explain why Friday prayers were important for me. And then I had to go to the mosque and I had to pray over there, and there was nothing nearby. So those things are really important. Just had a message from Charles. If you're not getting the volume, you need to check your own system because I've had text separately that people can hear us okay. And just to continue with that, when I was leaving, there were two more people who stood up and said, "Oh, we would like to go for Friday prayers as well." And I'm like, "Well, why did you not go there before?" They said, "Well, we never thought that we could ask for it, or these, reasonable adjustments or inclusion could be made." And that started my journey in the UK. This is going back 2005 in terms of to create more awareness and start inclusion that way. So that is just a little bit background about what is inclusion for me. So inclusion for me is trying to create an understanding, trying to share our experiences, trying to learn from each other. Inclusion is all about dialogue. It's not a debate because in a debate you have a winner or a loser. Inclusion is about a dialogue where you discuss in order to enhance and learn from each other experiences. So with that in mind, I think I'm going to continue with the theme of this topic and ask our amazing panelist, what does inclusion mean for you? So starting with Victoria, please give us a bit of a snapshot of what inclusion means to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Nasir. My journey is obviously completely different to yours. I'm a Yorkshire girl, grew up in a normal household, whatever normal means. I was lucky enough to be, able to go to a nice school, had a nice family. And yeah, I would say very, very fortunate. And like I say, our backgrounds are obviously completely different. And I think that you really hit the nail on the head for me when you said around dialogue and around learning, because I think that is what I'm absolutely passionate about. So I've been in HR for 20 years, crazy, and 12 of those years have been spent in professional services HR. So as you know, quite a male-dominated background. And my main experience that I'd really like to talk about in terms of my story before I move on to inclusion and what it means to me personally is that male environment piece. So I was in an all-male team. They were very into football. I had no interest in football. I was into my horse. They had no interest in what I did. And I decided very much, if I can't beat them, I'm going to join them. So I learned all about Tottenham Hotspur. I got myself educated. I could have told you the whole team in 2006. And one day there was a comment made to me that really has always stuck with me through my career. And it's not really, really bad or anything like that. I've not been unfortunate enough to have suffered direct discrimination. I've witnessed others in the past, but I've been lucky enough not to have experienced that myself. But a comment was made to me about me being the face of the team. And when I reflect on that now, number one, would they have said that if I wasn't a female? And number two, would you say that to anybody now? And what does that even mean? So moving on, I'd say my real passion for EDI, that hasn't shaped me or changed me, that comment. It's just something that stayed with me. But my passion for EDI began through work that I did with schools when I was in WIG, which I started with in 2011. I lost my mother very suddenly in 2014. I'd say that schools engagement work gave me an absolutely massive boost. With it being Leeds, obviously multicultural, so I really enjoyed learning about different backgrounds and different experiences. And linking into my mum, this isn't that long ago, but in 1980, when she went on maternity leave to have me, she just lost her job. You didn't have a job to go back to. The law did not change until, I believe, about 3 years later. So that's absolutely mind-boggling to me. That is not long ago. Another personal experience of why I'm so passionate about inclusion. My friend, I was having a walk with her at the weekend. She's from an Indian background. Her dad was attacked twice in the 70s. Again, that's not long ago. That was purely because of his race. I have a real passion for learning about different cultures. I live to travel. Anyone who knows me knows that I work for my travel. And I absolutely adore learning about different cultures. Particularly Thailand and the Caribbean have absolutely fascinated me. So much disadvantage in the world. We've come so far in this country, we've so far to go. But ultimately, I want to be able to be myself at work and in my day-to-day life, and I want to be able to support others to do the same. And that great work that we've done, Nasir, through the careers events with the MOS has really helped me to do that, breaking down those barriers. But the key thing you said is the learning. And that's what inclusion means to me. Are we on mute, Nasir?
Somebody had to do it. You can't do it.
Of course, it'll be me next, right?
It's really fascinating to hear that, because if you look at it, the challenges could be very similar, even though we come from so different background. And so moving on with the same question, Abid, what does inclusion mean to you? You're mute, Abid.
Well, somebody else had to do it as well. Firstly, thank you for inviting me to this panel. It's an honor to be with such guests. Like yourself, Nasir, I actually came from Pakistan, age 4 as well. I was born in Pakistan, so I came over age 4, went to all I had all my schooling here, my college, my university here. But I suppose when it comes to inclusion, it has definitely shaped my life, and at various times of my life, it's probably meant something different. But one thing that inclusion has never really changed, or what inclusivity has meant to me, is allowing me to practice my faith and being openly Muslim, so to say. What I mean by how it's meant different things at different stages is when I was in my 20s, I was, I wanted to be a professional footballer. And one thing that I did certainly notice was that sometimes I thought that I wouldn't get chosen, not because of my ability, but because of my heritage. And the reason I say that is because as a Pakistani heritage, you're not really known for football. We're known for our cricket, we're known for our hockey, we're known for our squash, and we're known for kabaddi. Kabaddi is a very brutal sport. Whatever you do, don't try it. And with having said that, what I mean by being openly Muslim is really just to be respected for following my faith. You know, by giving the opportunity to pray, have the flexibility in working hours in the month of Ramadan, and ultimately, what this does is it encompasses physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. So that's basically my, what inclusion actually means to me. You're on mute.
I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm going to ask you some more about it, Abid, but I'm going to just, go around the circle that I have on the screen and just move on to Nicola. Nicola, we've worked in the past at Network Rail. We've done so many amazing things back at over there in terms of improving equality, diversity, and inclusion. But it's important to just get this background and get this out in terms of what does it mean for you, because you're so passionate about it and you've not stopped anything about this, even moving, you've actually grown in your efforts and what you're doing now. So what does it mean to you?
Yeah, hi Nasir, and hello to everybody on the call. So yeah, I think as Nasir said, it's a area that I've been incredibly passionate about for many years, and I think the interesting thing for me is that inclusiveness and feeling included is something that I think really started having an impact on me really from as long as I can remember. I was born in the UK, but I went to school back in the 80s at a time when we weren't as multicultural as we are today, and I think really my very first feeling when I was back and starting at primary school was that feeling of being another, and I put other in kind of enclosed sort of quotations, and I think as a result of that and going forward at a number of stages in my life, I felt like the other in the room. And I think we've come a long way from that, but I do think, we still have a huge amount to go. And I was just, in answer to your question, I was just thinking about some of the times when I felt like another. I was the only Black person in my school, me and my sister. I was the only person that spoke with a slightly different accent. I went to a school in Essex, and as all good Caribbean parents do, spent a huge amount of time trying to help me speak with a sort of cut glass English accent. So having gone to this school in Essex, I didn't have an Essex accent, so everybody thought I was very weird. When I went to university, I was the only person in my halls that hadn't come from a comprehensive school. Everybody else had come from a private or grammar school. And then in my career, joining Network Rail, I was 24 at the time when I started. I was the only person who was young, a person of colour, in an organisation that was predominantly white, male, and pretty much over 50. So all of these experiences really given me such an understanding as to, walking into a room and for whatever reason, being that other there. And I think that those experiences have really stuck with me. And I think, having had the chance to kind of move through my career now, I feel that I'm sort of one of the more mature people often in my team, in my organization, and I can see sort of young people coming along, and I think I very much empathize with them when often they can come into that room and they feel like the other. So I really do feel it as my duty and as a role that I can do very well in helping to break down that feeling of being another.
That's brilliant. That is amazing. Thank you very much for that background. And continuing with the same question, Tehya, I'll come over to you and ask you about what it means to you from your perspective. And just to let you know, you are on mute.
Thank you for letting me, and also thank you for having me. And so for me, this is my first webinar, and inclusion to me means that regardless of our differences, we are all given respect. And we must also broaden our understanding, accept a difference of opinion, and also be an ally for change. So to me, what this looks like in the workplace is it means that we must be an actively challenging non-inclusive workplace rules and policies, by taking action when discrimination occurs, and by building an understanding of the different departments within your business and how they play roles in inclusion. So to me, I joined CICES back as an apprentice in 2021, and that was back when I wasn't practicing any religion. But throughout 2022, I actually came to Islam through, it's a very long background, so I won't bore you with the details, but back in November, I actually ended up converting. And for several months, I actually spent a long time just feeling worried about what the opinions of others would be when I start to wear the headscarf, also known as hijab. But back in March, I made the decision to actually begin wearing it full time in the workplace too. So the day before going to work, I was really nervous, and I thought to ease the situation for both myself and my colleagues, I'd write an email to everyone in my institution to address them and let them know of the changes that I'd be making physically going forwards. And I think that really helped just break down the barriers. So when I went into the office the next day, there was no sort of awkward looks, and I felt like there was an understanding coming from both sides. And just a few months after that, actually, I went to Geobusiness and I had a really cool conversation with another colleague, and it just came about through a dinner that we had. And yeah, basically they were just asking my decisions on wearing the headscarf and also about how I came about Islam. And you know what? Both of these conversations led to so much further understanding and mutual respect. So over the past few years, I'd say it has led me to become a lot more conscious of inclusion and how it plays a role in both my life and in society as a whole. So I'm able to now practice my faith and be proud of it due to inclusion rather than hiding it. And I think that's what inclusion means to me.
Wow, that is a background and a half. Well done and fantastic, because one of the thing you mentioned is respect. And that is such an important subject, because we are always talking about, should we tolerate something or should we respect something? And when you mention respect, it provides that ample provision into, because I go back to the university definitions of both of these words. And what is respect? Respect is to give due regard to someone's wants and needs. Whereas when you go into tolerance, tolerance is about to put up with something that you dislike. Now, I want to give respect to make inclusion really work, rather than to put up with something that I dislike. It's very much so, like when you're talking to someone, do you want to tolerate them or do you want to respect them? It's very simple. I pick up anyone from, either four of you or somebody, you know, from the participants, without naming any of you, is very much, if I say to you on your face, I tolerate you, I don't think you're going to like that conversation any further. But if I'm saying to you, I respect you, or I respect them, her, she, whoever they are, from that perspective, I think we will have a better conversation. And just to give a conclusion on, what kind of inclusion means to us, is very much that the right to inclusion includes that transformation of our cultural viewpoints. It embraces our practices in both formal and non-formal environments. And I think where inclusion receives its respect is when these environments actually cater for your requirements and your identities as an individual, as a collective, to provide or to remove barriers that impede inclusion. So if we need to strengthen inclusion, we need to develop the capacity of the system around us. And Tahia, you mentioned this very eloquently in terms of what policies there are which we can challenge. And this is, Victoria, you mentioned, you know, what would you have done at that time differently, when that comment was made? Would it be something different, or what education was available Nicola, so you don't feel the odd one out, in that environment. And that is what inclusion is all about. So within that, I'm going to just, ask you all further so we can improve inclusion for us, for everyone around us, and for where we belong. So Abid, I'm going to start with you from this perspective, if you don't mind, because you have such an important role to play in terms of recruitment. And for those who may have read Abid's introduction, Abid's been working in the recruitment sector within rail and civil engineering sector for 20 years now. So you've seen the transition from how it was back then and now. And the question is, what are you doing to improve inclusion around you?
Yeah, I've been in, like you mentioned, I've been in recruitment for over 20 years. And when I joined in the noughties, I don't think anybody can honestly say there was equal access, and opportunities in a workplace environment compared to what we have now. Now it's far, far more inclusive. I do recall when I first joined, and the owner of Vital, John Smith, he seemed to be ahead of the curve back then, and his philosophy and recruitment mantra seemed to tick all the inclusivity boxes. And it was very simple. It was, if one can do the job, I don't care who they are, how old they are, what they look like, or where they come from, get them in for an interview. I mean, that was his mantra. That was his mantra back then. But I mean, there's a couple of, a couple of real life scenarios which came about back then. Just to give you an idea of what it was actually like, was there was a belief that if you had a non-British name in recruitment back then, you wouldn't do very well. The clients wouldn't give you the opportunities. The applicants may not speak to you. So that seemed to be a real thing back then. I remember asking my manager back then. His name was Mohammed Ijaz, and he's still my manager now, 20 years later. And when I asked him that question, he said to me, says, if an applicant or a client doesn't want to speak to you because of your name, that's not really a client or an applicant you want to work with. And that stuck with me. And proudly, we've always used our names. We've never, ever changed that. And, just one real quick thing is, I remember back then, I received a CV, and back in those days, and I think it happens now, was on the CVs, you'd get a picture of a person. And imagine, the picture that I got of this CV, which was absolutely perfect for this role that I was recruiting for back then, it was a very South Asian looking man. He had a winning smile, a twinkle in his eye. He had a mustache you'd envy, but his name was Eric Hardman. It just didn't fit. I rang him because obviously, like I said, he was right for the role. And I asked him, what his actual name was, what his name was on his passport. And it was Iraj Harshan. He was a Sri Lankan gentleman. And I asked him, I said, why have you changed your name on your CV? And he said, before I changed my name, I'd applied for over 50 jobs. Nobody bothered ringing me. Nobody spoke to me. Ever since I changed my name to Eric Hardman, I've had more calls and more interviews and more discussion with recruiters than I've ever had. So that kind of gives you a bit of an idea of what it was like back in the 20s. And there has been, some discussions regarding changing names on CVs. People that had Muslim names and people that had non-Muslim names, exact same CVs going out to different companies, and the non-British names, non-British sounding names, they wouldn't get an interview, or they wouldn't get a look in, or they'd get rejected. But a British sounding name would get an interview. And this happened recently. I think only about maybe 5 or 10 years ago this happened, and it seems to still happen today. But so that's basically what I'm, what happened back in those days. And somebody mentioned something to me earlier, which I want to share with you, and really quickly. With AI coming in and changing the way recruitment is, these algorithms and these codes, depending on who they're written by, could inherently be biased. You know, these algorithms, if they're written by, depending who it is, you could potentially get digital racism. You could actually get something that is sifting out a CV digitally, which isn't choosing somebody because of their name. Something to think about, eh?
Wow. Changing names. Never thought of that when I was making my 1500th application for a job. Just kidding. But as I mentioned on the notes as well, and this is something I'm familiar with in working in the public sector in the past, is there is a lot of promotion of blank CVs because of that. Just so people do not go into unconscious bias, and that is something I'm going to talk about later in terms of inclusion summarization anyway. So Nicola, what's happening? I know a lot is happening. Tell us a bit about what is happening.
Yeah, so I think the conversation is really moving along at pace now, and I am, you know, really heartened to see the kind of progress that is being made. A lot of it, I think, are being driven by the organisations themselves, because I think, as Abid said, it's good business practice. Organisations want the best people for the roles that they're advertising for, and not only that, I think they want to reflect the population and the communities that they're serving. So I think those two aspects alone have really been a kind of core driver in terms of moving forward the discussion around inclusivity and how we make that happen. The other thing I think for me in terms of kind of why this has moved forward is I think people are less willing to put up with some of the dreadful behaviours that we have seen in the past. And I think, you know, more and more as we see some of the kind of younger generation of millennials coming on, I know, you know, from my, you know, both my son and daughter are about to enter the workforce, you know, very often I will tell them about some of the things that I experienced when I sort of first joined, and they'd be, you know, they're absolutely horrified. They're like, how on earth would you put up with that? And I do think, as you know, recruiters going forward, as you know, line managers, you know, we're having to kind of ask ourselves whether some of the things that we asked our employees to do previously they are going to want to and should rightly put up with. And I think interesting in that question you asked at the beginning, you mentioned at the beginning, Nasir, that you know you put forward and said actually there's a reason why I'm not able to attend this 1 p.m. meeting, and I think, you know, two other people then also put their hand up and said, yep, this isn't right for me also. And I think that's such a powerful piece now that those voices are being heard and people are more willing to speak up. And there is something in terms of the power that comes with that kind of willingness to speak your truth, and then really encourage others engaging in their need to speak their truth. So I think, you know, seeing that move forward now and seeing that is really being done in such a community in terms of EDI, I think that in itself is moving things forward with such a pace now, and I'm so delighted to be able to see that. And you know, it's one of those things that kind of gains momentum as we go forward, and I certainly expect and I'm seeing things really starting to change and really happen in the direction that a lot of us as you know, who have been doing this for many years had really hoped to see this happen.
Wow, that is amazing. Especially when you mention about, you know, millennials, and this is kind of the norm. People expect it to be the norm, and I'll tell a different story later on about it at the end if we have time. But moving to Victoria, I know you're doing a lot in terms of, you know, improving inclusion around you, especially just to start with, tell me, how was, I mean, you mentioned it and I didn't pin it at that time, but how was your experience of doing careers fair in a different location, and both in Birmingham and London? And I will let you tell everyone a bit more about how was that experience for you?
Oh, it was fabulous. It was so different to anything that I'd done before, and I'm absolutely honoured, really, that I felt so welcomed into the mosque environment, and I was delighted that you presented the opportunity to us. So just to give a little bit of context, I lead a consortium on one of our key clients. It's a framework that we have, a major framework, and we have, to be blunt about it, we have reporting requirements around ED&I and schools engagement, but obviously we want to go beyond that. So as part of that, we try and do at least once a year a group activity that really will drive positive change. And those activities that Nasir has referred to is, we had a careers event in Green Lane Mosque in Birmingham in 2021 in the autumn, and we had the same event but with a slightly different twist at East London Mosque, and that was last autumn, and it was absolutely eye-opening. We were even invited to prayers at East London Mosque, and there was a couple of things that I saw that I just had absolutely no appreciation, you know, being absolutely honest, I had no appreciation for. And there was actually a funeral took place as part of prayers, and I talked to Nasir about that afterwards, and he says, yeah, that's absolutely part of it. And at no time were we asked to leave or anything like that. It was done. There'd be a private burial after, as I understand, but this was done in the full community environment. And I think what a fantastic opportunity to be able to be privileged enough to be invited into the mosque environment and to observe that. Weddings, as I understand, are done in the same way as well. So yeah, so that was basically it. So what we did was we had a stand. So each of our organisations had a stand. I met one of the really great stories that I've got is I met a young mum who herself actually ended up saying she was going to look at an apprentice route for project management. So she brought her children. She had absolutely no understanding of what happened with an apprenticeship or anything. She'd been a mum. She'd been bringing up the family, and that had been her role. And she asked so many questions. One of my colleagues, she's the youngest chartered project manager in the UK. She talked her through her journey, which was purely apprentice. So she did not attend university. And this lady was absolutely fascinated. And I think that was my absolute highlight from East London Mosque. And the Green Lane Mosque event in Birmingham, we had one of my colleagues do a speech. He's worked all over the world. One of his key experiences is in Dubai. And the engagement that we got from the room, so the school children who, you know, there's a lot from different background, every different background you could possibly think of. And they were all absolutely glued and asking questions and just so interested, and just no knowledge of the kind of careers that you can have in the rail industry, and understand, you know, these are well-paid professional careers, and just not knowing about them. They wouldn't have ever considered an apprenticeship in project management or quantity surveying had we not, you know, done these events. So critically important. And it was this opportunity, this framework that I've described, and this consortium, that was one of the key things that drew me to my Gleeds role. And we've actually seen through the reporting, you know, the last thing I ever wanted was for that reporting to feel like a tick box and just part of a contractual requirement. But we've seen that positive increase. So through minority groups in the rail industry, which is a very well-known underrepresented industry, we've seen those percentage increases, you know, and just breaking, I think the key thing for me with that is breaking down those barriers and getting to do something that is unique and that I have never had the opportunity to get involved with before, and really look forward to doing so again, as Nasir knows.
Oh, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much for bringing down those memories. We've got to definitely do that again. And there are a lot of people here on this webinar in the audience as well, who I would love to go and really talk about their experiences, because that's what we need. We need role models from different backgrounds and different possibilities. And that is what excites, and that's what my experience has been dealing with at career fairs and things, at different schools, different cities, different locations, is just to give them a feel for that. If they can dream, they can achieve it. And it's about providing those opportunities and making those opportunities more inclusive. Taya, I'm going to, just thank you first for giving us some of the examples of how inclusion has allowed you to practice your faith at workplace, wearing a hijab, changing it, the support you've received from the institution. That is fantastic. Now that's you as an individual. So tell me, how could someone, try make institutions more inclusive, and what is happening at a professional institution level?
Okay, perfect. So I'll have to just go from my experience, which a great way to start is by reading. I think knowledge is so powerful. And one book that I've been reading currently is called Mind the Inclusion Gap, which is by Susie Levy, which looks at inclusion basically and the skill shortage to tackle inclusion issues. So another piece of advice that I'd give is, if you have the ability to speak directly with your CEO or senior leadership team, it'll be easier to make changes from the top downwards in terms of inclusion. But if not, at least be able to familiarize yourself with the different departments in your company, like I mentioned before, and how each are contributing to either making the workplace more inclusive or also less inclusive, So, you can also begin working on reviewing your own department and if any changes can be made first, just so that you can focus on one step at a time rather than trying to tackle everything, because that'll just become way too overwhelming. So another thing is, at staff meetings, don't be afraid to raise an issue. If you're noticing something that you're uncomfortable with, raise it then and there. But if you're not comfortable to, there's also the option to then speak to your line manager or someone else at work that you trust. I think there's a real importance around not just saying that an institution will be more inclusive, but that they're actually actively working towards it. So for us, we're really lucky. Our previous CEO and Alan put in place a 30-year strategy, which also included golden threads, which cover EDI, sustainability, and digitalization. So off the back of that, everything that we do, we try and tie those golden threads into the messages that we have. So yeah, in conclusion, I guess the best way to make an institution more inclusive is to be able to face uncomfortable situations, to be willing to ask questions that might be challenging for us, also be comfortable making mistakes. There is no... Inclusion is a very sensitive topic, and you can easily offend someone, but as long as you're ready to then apologize and try and change your actions in the future, it will be okay. And yeah, so if you don't also have a EDI chair, that's something that I'd recommend too. We have an EDI chair, and we also have EDI representatives for some of our regional committees too.
That's brilliant. I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. I mean, from an industry wide, there is a lot of things happening, and I think this is where your point is there, in terms of, we can't just talk about policies and things. It's more policies, and written documents have been there for last 20 years, I would say. It's more action time. It's more about showcasing the statistics, showcasing in terms of, if I give the institutions example, what was 10 years ago the difference between male and female membership, what is it now? Are we improving or increasing? How leadership is reflecting that, because it's about the image of the whole industry. I was at a construction industry council webinar a couple of months ago, actually, where they were talking about different templates of case studies, because we know construction, rail, infrastructure has always had a skills shortage. So it's about, are we making our industry inclusive? are we creating an image for the industry that is attractive, that is, progressive in terms of, does it value people? Does it have a clear and transparent criteria as a basis of recruitment, as a basis of promotion? All of these things will support and nurture career aspirations. And this is where I kind of want to move into, I mentioned, just touched upon it, uh, on bias a little bit. It's about how unconscious bias is dealt with, not just within our own organizations, also us as a person. Hand on heart, all the people here, you may have some sort of unconscious bias, whether it's with the youngest child, whether it's with the oldest child, whether it's with one of your siblings. We always have that. Okay, because I'll give an example. I have 3 boys and my youngest can get away with anything, and that's kind of the bias I have towards him. So we always have it. It's about knowing what you know and also knowing what you don't know, because if you don't know what you don't know is the biggest challenge. So if you have an understanding that, what, I may have a bit of an unconscious bias here, you're going to look at it. You're going to make that decision objectively. But if you don't know that, whether you are carrying an unconscious bias or any form of bias, how are you going to deal with it? So self-awareness, I think, is the most important thing in terms of making inclusion happen. And it's about going beyond policies, procedures, strategies. If if we are, to improve inclusion around us, we need to learn about our biases. Hey, we all carry some of them. Some carry, football team biases. I know, Victoria, as soon as you mentioned Tottenham Hotspur, there may be a lot of them, Arsenal fans would be like, oh, what are you talking about? So we all have those biases, and we just need to appreciate that. So I'm going to just, ask, and if you can just summarize it in say less than a minute, and I'm going to go one by one, starting with you, Nicola, in terms of, do you feel inclusion matters are handled appropriately at all levels?
So I think it's a really good question. And to try to keep your 1 minute, I think this is one of the areas that I think there is still a lot of work to be done. I think, getting people of different backgrounds, different ethnicities into organisations now is not the issue. It's actually keeping them there and helping them to move through the organisation. And that's often where I'm seeing those biases now, and the issues and some of the barriers that are within organisations. So for me, I think we're opening up the doors to allow people into the organisations. I think we've now got to do work around ensuring that we take out some of those obstacles that are helping people to really thrive in those organisations. And that's where I'm really doing, where I see the challenges right now, and I really see the work that EDI groups and organisations are really doing some hugely valuable activities.
Brilliant. Abid, if I'm, you tell us, please, in terms of your perspective, how inclusion matters are handled at the moment. You're mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Firstly, I just want to say, as an ambassador for Muslims in Rail for the last 4 years, they've really inspired me to champion inclusivity in the workplace. And I'll give you a really example of how this has happened. Is 12 months ago, a young an applicant came to us, and he wanted to. The reason he'd left his last position was because the company manager wouldn't allow him 5 minutes to pray. even though he told him that he'd make up the time and it wouldn't affect his performance. So when he came to us for an interview, and I mentioned to him that Vital have got a multi-faith prayer room, you should have seen his eyes light up. I mean, now he travels further, he doesn't get paid as much, but because he's feeling inclusive, he's absolutely one of the best employees that we've got, and he's doing really, really well. So, you know, I think it's, as Nicola mentioned earlier, we're getting people through the door. It's now making them feel safe, making them feel secure, making them feel that they are part of something. And as well as this, we're talking about, you know, within the workplace and you know, I really want to commend, you know, Mawson as a company, you know, some of the things that they're doing regarding inclusivity as well. You know, one of the mantras that they've got is listening to understand. You know, and they're really plugging the socioeconomic gap for STEM subjects, and they're going into some of the poorest areas in Salford, into the schools from age 8, you know, to try and teach them that STEM is something that doesn't matter what your background is, you can do that. And I know obviously as Muslims in Rail, we really promote this as well. You know, one of the other things was that Mawson, we did sponsored a STEM summit, and it was hosted by Rachel Riley and Miss England, Jess Gagan, and who's also an aerospace engineer, and she was discussing, you know, female inclusivity into the engineering industry, and you know, last but not least, what I'd also like to say is that, you know, we do an awful lot when it comes to ex-servicemen and women, giving them the opportunity. And we have an ambassador called Andy Reid, and he goes out and he tries to get, you know, ex-servicemen and women to come into the industry. And finally, what I want to do say is the STEM Foundation. This is something we're really, really proud of, because the founder of Mawson, his name was Jerry Mason, you know, God rest his soul. He started something because he was an engineer himself, and he came from quite a poor background as well. He has done, he's created something called the STEM Foundation, and this is part of Salford University, where they are opening up opportunities for those from socioeconomic backgrounds, you know, those that wouldn't normally get an opportunity to go to university or even get into engineering, and allowing them this opportunity by sponsoring their studies. So as a business, certainly I can say that it is really working within the business I work for, from the top, and it's coming down. And you know, the person that is certainly pushing that is Jed Mason. Jed Mason is the current CEO of Mawson, and he's pushing that. He's pushing his father's legacy, and I'm seeing it an awful lot within our business. And it makes me really proud to belong to a company that I'm, you know, such as Mawson, because of all these different things that we're doing. Yes, there's an awful lot of work still to do. Of course there is, but we're definitely going in the right direction.
Well, that's brilliant. Thank you, Abid. And Tehya, what would you feel if I say that inclusion matters are handled appropriately at the institution?
Okay, so I would say I'll just go quickly onto industry and then I'll go back to institution. So industry, I feel that given you know, there was the Equality Act brought up in 2010, there's still a lot that we need to be doing, really. But from an organisational perspective, you know, at the institution, we're all committed to making a difference, no matter how big or small it may be. So that being said, recently we've launched the Women's Network, and that was due to several women approaching one of our members back at the Manchester lecture, basically explaining their issues that they were facing within their individual businesses, and they were wanting advice from us. And thankfully, we've seen both men and women take part in that initiative, so that's always great to see. And we've also put in place a reasonable adjustments policy, and that was with the help of a few of our members. And we've had a few situations where we were able to make these adjustments for members, which has resulted in a really positive outcome. But, you know, hopefully other institutions will follow suit. And I feel that there has been a huge change towards the attitude of inclusivity, especially within our presidential chain. And we are now seeing diversity far more championed. So I feel as an institution, we have come a long way, There's still work to be done, obviously, but yeah, we're constantly trying to work at inclusion.
That is absolutely brilliant. Just before I move on to Victoria, Tehya, in terms of when you say that diversity is championed more, do you want to just elaborate a bit more so everybody who probably may not know what the difference is? Because I know who the current president is, who the next senior vice president is, but do you want to talk us a bit more from their background perspective?
Of course. So our current president is called Matsetsue Mutsumi, and he is our first Black president. And our next president is our first ever female president. And then following on from that is our first ever youngest president. So we've got 3 in a row who are, super inspirational and ambitious to make change in the industry.
Absolutely. I mean, I know Bats really well. First Black president for the institution, and his kind of tagline is collaboration. And he wants to make change with collaboration. And I think that's one of the fundamental recipe of inclusion to make collaboration really, really work. I'm going to ask Victoria this question, and then we've got some questions from the people attending. Is Victoria, what do you think are inclusion matters handled appropriately at all levels within not just your organization, in the major projects that you're working on? Am I allowed to talk about the major project you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I won't obviously say client names, but I think I can answer that without breaking any confidentiality. But I think for me, it goes across the projects that we work on, our organisation, the industry as a whole. Inclusion is everyone's responsibility. That's how I see it. And we talked about it. Of course, it goes beyond policy and strategy. But as part of what we've done, and I can share this with you, as part of what we've done at Gleeds, we've moved away from ED&I into FIR, so the fairness, inclusion and respect piece. We've formed a steering group, which is headed up at the very top level by our HR director. So this is the key when we've talked about that top-down piece. So she's the lead of our steering group with myself and 3 other members of the people team. We then also have SLT, so senior leadership representation on our allies groups, to really give it that top-down piece. But then moving beyond that, we try and embed fairness, inclusion and respect meeting moments, which often ties into wellbeing. One example being Menopause Awareness Month, and blogs as well. So just recently, we had one of our directors do a blog around how his wife going through menopause has personally affected the entire family. So himself, the mental health of their children, everything. So the whole piece around how that health situation affected not only his wife, but those around him. So that's the kind of culture we're trying to move towards, is making it everyone's responsibility through education, as I do keep harping back to, I know. We've seen that through our survey. So our most recent survey, I can share this with you as well. 91% of our UK colleagues agreed that we're committed to D&I. 87% of our people agreed that they can be their whole selves at Gleeds. You can probably tell by my passion that for me just says, wow, I'm not saying we're 100% there, we're not, but my goodness, that is positive and just something really great to build on. I love leading our Diversibility Ally group. That's focused on hidden and visible disabilities. We attracted extra members as a result of taking over one of our weekly chairman calls. I think the other thing is, don't be afraid to call out things that you witness or personally experience. That's something that I've gained confidence in the last few years through the major projects, as you alluded to, Nasir, through that work, through that group, that consortium, but also through my own organisation. And our MD recently said, FIR is not a corporate programme. It's lived through interactions and how we do business. And that's absolutely it for me.
That's brilliant. We've got lots and lots of lovely comments coming through the chat. I'm hoping you're all reading them or looking through them. So Liz, thank you very much for amazing comment. And Liz is doing a lot of work. So I sit on HKA's ED&I committee with Liz, and we're doing a lot of work in terms of inclusion. And when I was mentioning earlier at the start of this chat that people do ask questions about equality, diversity, and inclusion now before they accept a role. I'm one of them. I now ask what the organization is doing, and I am so pleased to see the amount of work. I mean, HK as a global organization understands and creates that environment, which is amazing testament to the leadership team. Definitely. I've also been asked about a question. Abid, you mentioned about Muslims in Rail in terms of what is Muslims in Rail doing to make the change in the industry, to make it more inclusive and things like that. So we don't just do dinners, which we do because we love food, but we do a lot of advisory work as well to the government, to the DFT, to GBR. We did a lot of transport sector advisory work in terms of leveling up, in terms of long-term economic growth for transport for the North, in terms of through we have a think tank within Muslims in Rail that is very senior people who have experience in the industry, and they bring in those different perspective and attributes to make the industry, the infrastructure more inclusive. It's all about delivering environmental sustainability as our valued objective. So representing the British Muslim community and the surrounding, I think it's important that we live up to our motto of connect, grow, and inspire, because through connections like this webinar, I know Liz has already asked about getting in touch with the panelist in terms of going through some of the experiences. Patrick has been my mentor for a very long time, and we started the ED&I committee at the institution together, and I was very heavily involved in writing its terms of reference, etc., that it has to be led from the top. So really pleased to see that this is Patrick testament to, from we've been saying it for 5 years, in terms of we can't just write terms of reference policies, we need to be showing it. And I think having the first Black president and then the next president to be a first woman is a testament that those policies are not just a piece of paper, they're actually happening. We're running out of time. I really want to thank everyone for coming on to it, and would just like to close this session with a something that I live by. It's something Theodore Roosevelt said: in any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing. The next best thing is the wrong thing. And the worst thing you can do is nothing. So on that, if we want to make inclusion happen, do something about it. Thank you very much all. Thank you for attending. And we wish you a lovely week and a fantastic October.